Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Yo. Okay.
We good back there?
Maybe I'll rap.
Yeah. We'll see if we can get him to rap. As part of Q&A, we'll have Q&A at the end. Somebody ask him to rap, please.
Only late 90s rap.
That's my era. All right, well, let's just start off, first of all, and hear a little bit about your background and what you've done, and help people just get to know you and who you are and what you've done in your career. So let's start off with a little bit. So you have a bachelor's degree from University of Maryland. Is that correct? And I found a really cool picture of you on their website from your track days and all your track glory. Is that right?
Yeah, not much glory, but a lot of track in there. Before I jump into that, I wanted to acknowledge and thank all of you. I haven't been to Boise since 2011, and by the way, I think I said it right. I've been practicing all day, Boise. But I wanted to give a shout out to this community because the original investors in my company were based here in Boise. So actually Mark Solon over there from Highway 12 Ventures was the main investor in our company. So we've had an amazing connection to this area. Embarrassingly, I haven't been back out here since 2011, but I think this is an amazing place. It has a soft spot in our heart. And being from Boulder, I think it's a similar town, similar ethos. So just shout out to all of you trying to do startups in, outside of the valley. It's awesome to see, and we're really supportive of that. So thank you for welcoming me. It's been an awesome day so far. You guys have a lot of great stuff going on here, and it's fun to come and hang out. So at the end, I will give you guys the standing ovation. If maybe we'll do a new Startup Grind tradition.
That's
where
a great
the presenter
tradition.
gives the audience the standing ovation at the end. So we'll see how good the questions are. Then we'll do that. Okay, back to your question, which. So yeah, I grew up in Boulder, but I went to the University of Maryland because I had to leave the state. Living in Boulder is a bubble. I bet people here think it's, there's the Boise bubble probably too. I wanted to see a little bit more of the real world. I wasn't really sheltered growing up, but I wanted to go far from home for a little while. And all my family is from the Midwest or from the West Coast. So I went to the University of Maryland. The reason why I went there was they were the worst Division I track and field team, and I thought I had a chance of making the team. And I did. I was the 8th person out of 8 spots, so I was the worst person on the worst Division I track and field team. But the point was that I made it. And so that photo you saw of me, I probably was looking a little stunned, like, oh my God, what am I doing here? But
I think it was very stunned during the headlight. Hey, but you made it.
I made it.
D1. That's awesome. And nothing ever dies on the internet, so.
I know. Well, I'm just old enough that I didn't put enough really dumb stuff online, but there's a little bit of dumb stuff online.
Nice. So what did that athletic experience, I know you're into sports and mountain biking and you did track and cross country and those things. What do you think athletics has taught you about entrepreneurship, and how has that helped you on your journey?
I think it's taught me a lot. We don't when I see founders who have sports on their background, I like to ask them about it because I think it can be a defining part of one's life, and it certainly was for me. I think the big thing for me was the original reason why I got into track and field was not actually the competitive side, it was the social side. So I wanted a community of folks that were pursuing similar things, and so in high school I joined the track team my junior year because I was looking for a new group of friends. And so for me, a huge piece of it was the team aspect. And I think the biggest takeaway for me from it is, as an entrepreneur, you're building a team, and you're going to be only as successful as your team is and can work together. And even in track and field, and especially in cross country, the value of the team was really important. So what was interesting was I was the worst player on the team my freshman year, but by senior year I was the team captain because I realized how valuable it was to be a part of a team, and I was fortunate to sort of lead the team. So I would say that first and foremost was the value of team and people. And then I think that what you see as both an entrepreneur and as a runner is that you don't really make it's hard to make step function growth as an athlete. Like you get better by the repetition of doing things over and over again, a little bit better every time, and this iterative cycle of improvement. And I think startups are a lot the same way. And sometimes what you'll see is you'll have these breakthrough moments, but they aren't from, eureka insights that happen overnight. It's more from this iterative process. And I found that that was the same both in sports and in entrepreneurship, that I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's really good. It also reminds me of this idea of surrounding yourself with excellent people and rising to their level. Like, you know, maybe you're the 8th person on the team, but hey, at least you're around other D1 runners that could help you out, and you know, you're part of their team now.
Yeah, very true. I mean, I think that there's some saying that I'm gonna mess up, but you're the average of all of the people you surround yourself with, or something like that. So I think it is always worthwhile to figure out, like, how can I surround myself with amazing people that inspire me or that are better than me, so I can continue to grow. And I think as an athlete, that's effective, and certainly it was for me. And as an entrepreneur, that's also a good strategy. So coming to an event like this and getting to network and meet people who have different skills, different ability levels, I think you're raising your ability as an entrepreneur as well. So I agree with that point for sure.
Very good. I noticed in your background as well, somehow you got connected at that time to Jim Collins. I think, is it his wife that teaches there? Is that how you got?
Yeah, so this is like the stroke of, like, I'm a huge believer in luck. And actually Jim wrote in one of the books I helped him with this concept of getting return on luck, which for me, before I had heard that concept, was more this concept of creating your own luck by putting yourself in positions to take advantage of opportunities. So one of the very amazing strokes of good luck in my life was that my high school coach, high school cross country coach, is Jim Collins' wife. And so when I went to school, I was looking for an internship. I wanted to come back to Boulder because there was better training in the elevation and mountains of Boulder, but I didn't really have any business connections. Everyone in my family is a teacher. Like, we don't really like do business in my family. They still don't really. I mean, they get what I do, but they try to keep their distance. But I was like, I don't know anyone in business. Who should I hang out with? And so I reached out to Joanne, and she said Jim hires these summer associates to work on doing research for his books, and that's how I got connected with him, which was this an amazing strike of good luck. But then this concept of return on luck, which he actually created in one of the books I worked on, the book is called Great by Choice, and I actually think it might be one of the best startup books. It's not written primarily for startups, but I highly recommend it. I am biased on it, but I really do think it's one of the best books for startups. But in the concept of getting a return on luck was here I was given this opportunity of an introduction to Jim Collins. Maybe I could get a job with him, but my interview was with him the next night. So I frantically read Good to Great the night before, like took a bunch of notes, stayed up all night, really prepared for the interview, got the job, then worked my tail off working for him for 3 years. And that was just an amazing stroke of good luck, but I think, you know, I had to capitalize on it. And so we all get these moments where fortune shines on us, and we need to take advantage of them. So I was really lucky, but I was also proud of my ability to take advantage of that opportunity.
That's really cool. So have any of you guys read any of Jim Collins' work? Good to Great, Built to Last. Yeah.
It's kind of more for the like corporate set, but I think that the principles in it are some of the best principles when applied to startups. So if you're looking for a good book, I recommend it. And the thing that I think is unique about it compared to almost all other business books is almost all their business books are they do the opposite of what we say in startups, which is the plural of anecdote is not data. So almost all other books, they just tell, like, they find this interesting story and then they extrapolate from that some pattern and say, go do that thing. And that's really rare that those things are actually good strategies. They happen to work once or maybe twice, but what are things that work all the time? And Jim spends 10 years researching his books. Like, I've seen the amount of data he gathers for them. So the insights in his books are proven by loads and loads of data, not anecdote. So that's why I think they're very powerful, is that they're not based on these one-off stories.
You obviously didn't become an author or go down that route like Jim, but I'm sure there were some ways that it shaped
That's
you.
coming soon.
Okay, coming soon. Look for his book debut.
I have an idea, but I'm a horrible writer, so.
Well, books in the back for him to sign at the end. But how did that experience shape you, whether, you know, learning from Jim Collins or just being in the writing field and the research field? What are some other takeaways or ways that has shaped you?
There are two big ones for me. One is when you're around someone in the caliber of Jim Collins, you really learn what it means to be a critical thinker. So he pushed me so hard to defend my recommendations, to understand the material that I was working on, to be really a deep thinker, and I learned amazing skills from him in that, and he did it in a very like mindful and respectful way. Like he wasn't a jerk. He just set really high expectations and modeled incredibly good behavior. So I would say that first was like how to be a critical thinker, and then the second is the value of good research and good data. So this sort of gets back to my earlier point, which a lot of these business books today just get a story and run with it. Well, what if you really like get a significant set of data? What if you really try to like disprove the hypotheses that you come up with? So I learned a ton around what does it mean to make a good argument, to make a good case, to get good data. And that's translated into all my startup and business work, because really what we have in startups and businesses is we have these hunches. And then what you're trying to take is this hunch and turn it into a hypothesis. And then you have this hypothesis and you want to test it and see if you're right or if you're wrong. And it's this sort of like iterative process that I talked about coming back to running. These small wins is this iterative process of effectively the scientific method, testing your hypotheses around your business that then turn into insight, and that insight turns into value. So I think the underlying premise there is that you have to understand what good data looks like and what good research looks like to be able to test your hypotheses. So that was a huge thing that I learned from my exposure to Jim. And he probably took it to like the most extreme, because he like, I mean, I was just looking over at the lockers over here. He had bookshelves, the length of those lockers, full of research for each book. And the crazy thing that he asked me to do, which I still think this is insane, this is sort of like a pre-internet era, was one of my jobs was studying the airline industry. And we were comparing Southwest Airlines, which you all know, to Pacific Southwest Airlines, which you probably very few of you know. The interesting thing is, in 1970, Pacific Southwest Airlines was the most well-known kind of low-cost interstate airline, incredibly successful, flew in California only because the industry was regulated. Southwest literally went to them and said, we want to exactly copy what you're doing in Texas. We're going to just do an interstate airline, just like they were doing in California. And since the industry was regulated, Pacific Southwest Airlines said, awesome, here's our operating manuals. Like literally, here's our operating manuals. Southwest took them, photocopied them, did the exact same model in Texas. When deregulation happened, they were able to compete across state lines. But what we were looking at was, here you have two companies that were literally exactly the same. Like they started from the exact same operating documents and principles, except for Pacific Southwest Airlines was probably 10 years ahead of Southwest Airlines. So you had a very small company and an incumbent who had the exact same business model. One of them is the top performing stock from 1970 to 2000 of all stocks is Southwest Airlines over that 30-year period, and one of them died. So we looked at like what happened between these two exact replica companies. One is incredibly successful and one isn't. And so the research project I had to understand that was I had to collect every single article and book ever written about Pacific Southwest Airlines and Southwest Airlines between 1970 and 2000. And I'll tell you, I literally was like in the University of Colorado library for all day, every day, listening to music, and we would fill like a bookshelf that big with the articles, and then he would take that and he would take 10 other comparison candidates, so two companies that were very similar, and try to get insight out of all of that. And I'm like, that level of research is just insane. But that's what goes into his books, and why I'm a big advocate of them, because I think that level of research really does generate incredible insight. So, small tangent, but I think really interesting stuff that I learned from working with him.
That is really thorough research. That's incredible.
No internet back then. Well, not no internet, but you know, early Lexus Nexus at best.
You're still learning Booleans and all that. Yeah. I remember that. Wow, that's a lot. But there's a good startup idea for you guys. Just go get somebody else's operating manual, right? Like Southwest.
I mean, right, like that comes, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, and Great by Choice talks a lot about the difference between the two, but you know, it really comes down to execution, right? And everyone has great ideas.
Yep, got to out-execute. Moving along in your career, so you graduated and then you took a job on Wall Street. Was it the GE rotational program? Is that right? Okay. So you did that for a few years before founding a company. But I guess what was that jump like, or what was Wall Street like that you said, I want to do a startup? I mean, how do you make that leap, Wall Street to startup?
A little bit of it was a push from the market itself, which I'll talk about, but I kind of got like caught up in the hoopla of private equity, hedge funds, finance, investment banking. I was going to school on the East Coast, and so I was like, I gotta get me some of this like investment banking stuff. I actually didn't do pure investment banking, but I worked in corporate finance on the East Coast, and it was an amazing experience. I actually loved it. I worked for GE Capital, which doesn't really exist anymore, but they have this amazing rotational program where you basically are taking classes while doing work, and so it was just very intense, tons of great learning. I got exposure to New York City. It was a fantastic program. I had a buddy who I grew up with named Nate. We're actually both named Nathaniel, and we went to elementary school together. So two Nathaniels. I went by Natty, he went by Nate, and he's who I eventually started my company with. But he was working in finance in New York also. And we both did our 100-hour-a-week for 2 years jobs, and we're like, we're gonna go travel around the world, because we didn't get to study abroad, like we just wanted to do that. So we both negotiated new jobs after our programs, but with a 6-month delayed start date. And we went to travel around the world. We never left really South and Central America because it was just so amazing down there, but we spent 6 months traveling around. And this was in 2008 when the financial crisis hit. So when we were down there, we had these plans to come back, but then we got a phone call from our jobs saying our jobs no longer existed. So we were kind of like, okay, well, what are we gonna do? And we decided to climb another mountain and spend another day surfing, and we're like, we'll figure that out later. But eventually, we were like, we gotta actually do something. We can't just bum around and travel. We had burned through our savings, and we were trying to figure out what was next. And we were in Cartagena, Colombia. I know we got a Colombian right there, right on, awesome. We were in Cartagena, Colombia at the time, and there was no good hostel to stay in. And we were like, this is such a cool city, let's start a hostel. So that was our first business venture. We tried to raise money in Colombia in the financial crisis with broken Spanish, which failed, clearly. But that was sort of like the impetus. We're like, oh, that was really fun thinking about starting a business together. Why don't we do that? So then we actually took a sailboat from Colombia to Panama, because there's no road through the Darien Gap there. We took a sailboat, and we were just kind of milling around on the sailboat. And we were thinking like, well, what kind of business do we want to start? Like, what is a real problem that we have? And the problem that we kind of came up with, which we ended up starting our company around, was we were having this amazing travel experience, but we didn't have a great way to record and share it. Now, this Facebook existed, Flickr existed, blogs existed, Twitter existed. The problem was all of these mediums were disconnected, and when you posted something, the feed moved so fast that you never could recover it. And so our thought was, can we create this platform where you document and share these experiences and they'll live on forever, but when you publish them there, they'll distribute to all of the other places that you have your network, and you'll be able to have this keepsake and this memory. And we also, it was early 2008, so we wanted a mobile app so you would work offline. We wanted to have printed photo book technology, so at the end of the trip you click print and boom, voila, you get this amazing scrapbook of your trip. So we decided to start that company. We moved back to Colorado into each of our parents' basements and built that company. So that's sort of
the
like
American dream for our generation.
Right.
Your parents' basement.
Parents' basement. We literally did it. And so that was sort of it. So I would say, to answer the question, it was a combination of the market rejecting us from the finance ecosystem, kicking us out, and us deciding we wanted to work together, and we had this idea and this problem that we wanted to solve.
And is that a good description of what the product became?
Yeah, so we actually delivered on all of that. Early mobile app, offline, so you could upload photos and stories and videos while you were disconnected. They would sync to the cloud. Basically, a travel blog was the backbone for everything. You could create stories, you could write reviews, you could document where you stayed. It had map integration, so it was a really powerful platform. It did pretty well. Oh, we also built the photo book technology, which was really cool. It did pretty well, what we found though was that a lot of people were using it who were going on organized tours. So if you were going on a cruise ship or if you're going to the Galapagos or something, and they were getting these blogs were getting shared extensively through social media. And so these tour operators would come to us and say, can we get branding on that? Can we like put our logo on that? Because these are an amazing word of mouth marketing tool. And we've always wanted to enable our customers to tell their stories, but we don't have a technical team. We're never going to build this stuff. So can we basically advertise on your blogs? And instead we realized, like, instead of providing advertising on it, well, why don't we power your whole online experience for your guests? So before the trip, they can meet each other, they can send messages. During the trip, they get a travel blog and they can share it. Afterwards, they can share photos. So with a small change in our technology, we basically became the login button on the tour operator's website. They would end up managing their itinerary documents and communications with customers through it. So it was an interesting shift from a B2C product to a B2B product, and that solved sort of our revenue concerns because we were struggling to make money selling these photo books because not that many people were buying them. But these tour operators would basically like pay us a ton of money to deploy this software for their guests that became really powerful engagement tool for them and a word of mouth marketing tool. So the business ended up shifting from B2B product to a B2C product to a B2B product.
I'm always curious too about when entrepreneurs have moments of validation, I guess I'll call them, right? Where you're testing these hypotheses, not to say like, moments where you figure like this might actually work. Like, wow, we're on to something here. Did you experience any of those? Do you have any that might be beneficial for us to hear, like moments of validation?
Yeah, I think for us it was sort of going back to like lots of small wins. Like I'll share one sort of big jump for us, but really it was just like, I think startups are really about like momentum. And so we just spent a ton of time producing lots of little wins that built this momentum. And that was everything from the actual development of our product, but also galvanizing the community around us as entrepreneurs. So we would go to tons of events. We were very open with what we were doing. We made connections for people. We participated in the community. We tried to do all of these little things, both in our community interaction, in our product, in our company, that tried to build and effectively create like a wave of momentum for us in all of these areas. So I think for us, there were very few kind of like big breakthroughs, except for one I'll tell you. It was just a lot of little things adding up and really a lot of hard work. The big breakthrough for us was, actually there were two breakthroughs. One almost killed us and one was helped us be successful. The one that almost killed us was Martha Stewart reached out to us, and she wanted to power a honeymoon contest where people would blog about their honeymoon and we would power it, and they would give away like some stuff. And we're like, bada bing, like we just got validated by like a huge brand. This is a no-brainer for us. We should totally do this. So we just did it, and we didn't even think about the contract. We were just like so excited about it. And it turns out that we spent 4 months building technology, and we launched it, and Martha Stewart was like, we're not really gonna promote this. We got like 12 travel blogs out of it. Like it was like almost killed our company. And so it taught me this valuable lesson around, you think that there's gonna be this big breakthrough from, usually startups think a partnership. And I found that partnerships are really a lottery ticket. Like you might hit the jackpot, but it's unlikely that you will. And so don't sink all of your eggs in that basket. So fortunately for us, Mark was around and kept us alive through the ups and downs of that experience. But that was a huge negative of like an invalidation moment where we were like, oh my God, we just sunk like 4 months into something that's worth nothing. The one that was validating for us was when we went out to the first tour operator customer and said, and sort of had that first conversation, and we were like, so that technology, it's going to cost you $40,000 a year. $40,000 a year. Are you cool with that? And they're like, yep, cool. And we were like, oh my God, like we should have charged them way more than that, like it's fun to charge people for your product. We should do this more often. And so that was sort of a breakthrough moment for us because it gave us the confidence that we actually had built something valuable and that we could actually charge people for it. And it shocks me how many startups are afraid to charge for their product, but you got to charge for it at some point. And so it's better to start learning what that price point is as early as possible. So I would say that was a big moment for us because we were like, oh my God, we actually built something people like.
Yeah.
We may survive.
So a couple questions around this. So you mentioned that you started it with like a childhood friend as your co-founder, and I've heard mixed reviews on that, of like working with your friends versus like not founding a company with your friends. What are your thoughts around that, and like recommendations?
For us, it was incredible. Like I would almost never start a company with anyone but him. So, take any of my advice with a caveat that I'm incredibly lucky to have found someone that I love and trust that much and would lay down on the tracks for. I think that I would say in general, and I guess what I'll do is this will be less from my experience and more from our experience at Techstars, working with almost 1,000 or over 1,000 companies now. What we're really looking for is a founding team that has deep loyalty and love for each other, because startups are so dang hard. It's going to be a roller coaster. You need each other. So however you can get to that point of like deep loyalty, love, and trust with each other, it doesn't really matter how you get there, just that you get there. And so does that mean you need to be friends like we were since we were 3? That's one route. Does that mean that you could know that person for 6 months? Probably. I think it's probably a little bit harder to get to that point if you only known someone for 6 months. But that's really what you're trying to get. And so I don't really have a recommendation around like, oh, you should or shouldn't start companies with your friends. What you want to do is start companies with people that you love, you have loyalty to, and you trust. And that's the most important thing.
Good principles to build a team around. You also, I believe both you and your co-founder were non-technical, but you built your own product. Is that right? And what was that experience, and would you recommend that as well for maybe non-technical founders in the audience to do that technical thing?
Yeah, so the quick story on that is that we were 2 bankers who moved back to Boulder with no money and wanted to build a tech company. So we were like, oh, we'll go raise money. Oh yeah, and it was 2008 where no one was raising money. So we quickly realized that no one was funding first-time entrepreneurs who had no experience really building a tech company. So we just said, okay, we're so passionate about this, that's not going to stop us. So we bought programming books and spent 9 months in my parents' basement learning how to program and building the first version. A lot of that code ended up being in production through the whole tenure of the company, which is pretty cool. So we just were like, screw it, we're going to do it. Like, we'll teach ourselves how to program, and did it. We were fortunate in that we had the resource of my parents' basement and could live very inexpensively, which I think is important to not overlook. Not everyone is fortunate like that, but we had that. And so we just committed to doing it. And so I think what was there, that was actually, I would say, deciding to teach ourselves how to program may be the single best decision that we made as entrepreneurs. And here's why. First, it gave us a ton of credibility hiring engineers, because they were like, oh my God, like, yeah, you're not as good as I am, but you can talk the talk. Like, you get me. And if you're building a tech company, having great engineering talent is really, really important. So I think that it gave us a huge advantage when we were hiring and in empathy building with our staff. Second is, we proved to the whole Boulder community, who has been instrumental in our success, that we were for real. Like, nothing was going to stop us. And so, when you're an investor and you look at a company, you want to back a company who nothing is going to stop them. And so, people had doubts about us as entrepreneurs. Like, yeah, here are 2 guys with an idea, 2 finance guys with an idea. Like, we have they're a dime a dozen. But what finance guys are actually going to spend 9 months in their parents' basement teaching themselves how to program and actually coming out of it with kind of a cool product? So I think for us, it built an amazing amount of credibility in the community that then got us into Techstars. So I went through Techstars in 2009. That got us investment from a great investor. And so, had we not done that, and had we sat around and kind of been like, well, let's limp along until we can find someone to build this for us or try to raise money, like, we would never have built that credibility. So for those 2 reasons, I think it was probably the best decision that we made as founders. Now, is it for everyone? Probably not, but I do think that you have to prove as entrepreneurs that you're willing to do anything to get your product built, and if you don't have technical folks on your team, you got to get there somehow. And I think thinking that just raising capital is going to solve the problem is not really owning your destiny. And we all know how hard raising capital is, and it's been getting harder this year. So you got to figure out a way to do it. So does that mean you do it? Does that mean maybe you spend a bunch of time at events like this and meet some great engineers who love what you're doing and they can help out at the early stages. We ended up doing that too. After those 9 months, we got 2 great folks from the community to work with us for equity, and they helped augment us. So I think there's a bunch of ways to do it, but you just have to figure out as entrepreneurs, like how am I gonna create the product that I want to exist, and ideally not rely on other people as much as possible.
I like that advice. It's really good. We're going to have to skip over some things because I want to get into your Techstars role now, as well as some Q&A.
By the way, I forgot to mention this earlier, but I have very thick skin, so if I'm being boring or we're being boring, just yell out boring and we'll like move on, because it's, your guys' time is super valuable, so I hope you will, I'm giving you permission to yell boring if we're being boring. You should have said it right there, because I'm being boring right now. So anyways, please do that just to make sure we're entertaining and sharing good insight. You can yell out interesting if you want to.
Thank you, Norris, for the feedback. That's why I'm not doing the talking. So you had an exit, worked for a while for the acquirer, and then you've been involved with Techstars for the last year and a half. So tell us in the audience, I think a lot of people have heard of Techstars, but they might not know what Techstars is, why somebody would do it, and how they could get their company involved in Techstars. So maybe tell us a little bit more about it.
Sure. So Techstars is most well known for our accelerators, which started in Boulder in 2007, so over 10 years ago. We just did our 10th program. And our accelerator, I'll tell a little bit more about Techstars, but I'll focus on the accelerator because it's our bread and butter. Our accelerators are 13-week programs for about 10 companies where we go super deep and help the company make 2 years progress in 3 months. And the ways that we do that is a heavy focus on mentorship, a heavy focus on networking, a heavy focus on great content and curriculum to make entrepreneurs, to make great founders into great entrepreneurs. And we've done this now, I think we've run 70 programs, maybe more. We now run 22 a year around the world. So everywhere from Cape Town, Tel Aviv, London, Berlin. We're basically everywhere in the States except for Boise and San Francisco. So San Francisco obviously doesn't need another accelerator, and we fundamentally believe that you can build a great startup anywhere. So there are enough resources in San Francisco right now, so that's why we're not focused on San Francisco, but we want to support all of these other ecosystems. So I run the Techstars Boulder program, which is this accelerator that we run once a year for 13 weeks. And it continues to be a very selective program. We select about 1% of the companies that apply. We take companies everywhere from great founders with an idea to companies that have raised about 5 million or are doing about 5 million in revenue, are the two extremes. The average company for us right now has about 500K of capital raised, is anywhere from 2 to 6 founders, and probably has a product in market, maybe some revenue. That's the average company, but there's a widespread. And every managing director, like there are 22 other managing directors, we each make our own investment decisions and have our own thesis around what kind of companies we like to work with, so we each choose our own companies. One nuance on that is we have the Techstars Boulder program, we work with any kind of company. We also have vertically focused accelerators where we focus on one industry. So for instance, today was the demo day for Techstars in partnership with Target in Minneapolis, focused on retail technology. We have a great partnership with Barclays where we run 4 programs a year around fintech. We have one in Atlanta with Cox Enterprises, which is actually, it doesn't have a thematic focus, but it has a corporate sponsor. And what's powerful about those is we have great relationships with some of the best in the industry, and we try to foster partnerships and relationships for those startups. In addition to the accelerators, we also run Startup Week and Startup Weekend. So those organizations, which are around, and the purpose of those events is to galvanize startup communities and encourage more people to get into entrepreneurship and make it more approachable. And then above the accelerators, or kind of up the capital stack, we also have a venture capital arm that invests in the Techstars ecosystem.
Cool. And so you've touched on it some, but why would a company in Boise what value did they get out of Techstars, and how would somebody go about applying and getting involved into Techstars?
Yeah, so I think Techstars is for almost any startup that wants to accelerate and go faster, and especially founders who are interested in mentorship and candid feedback and networking and connections. So if that's the type of and I should say we almost exclusively focus on technology startups, mostly software, but some we have a good background of hardware, especially if it's software-enabled hardware. But if that describes you, then tech, and you're sort of like pre 5 million in funding, 5 million in revenue, like we should talk. What was the
how?
Oh, how? So we have a few cycles each year where we run programs. Right now we're recruiting companies for our Q1 programs, which run from January to April 2017. And you can go to techstars.com/apply and apply, and you can choose which programs you want to apply to. So like, for instance, if you want to come to my program, you select Boulder as your first choice, but maybe you want to go to New York, or you want to go to Seattle, or for whatever reason you choose another program. We leave that up to you.
Okay. This will be my last question, and then we'll do Q&A. So you're clearly reviewing these companies. You look at a lot, like you said, and then you make a selection choice. So what skills or attributes are you looking for in an entrepreneur, and then how could we develop those skills as entrepreneurs?
So skills that we look for as entrepreneurs, I would say when we think about companies that we're going to select for our programs, we think about 6 things in rank order, and those 6 things are team, market, progress, idea. And I think it's important to talk about those. So the point of that is to emphasize how important the team is. So what does that mean, like a great team? Why is it the first 3 of our 6 priorities? Is there passion behind the project or the product or the vision that the company has? Like, we don't want to fund companies that are just like, a willy-nilly idea. Like, we want to see deep passion and interest in a subject and a problem. We want to see a company or a set of founders that have proven that they can execute and get stuff done. So whether that's in your prior work experience, or you're a seasoned entrepreneur, we just want to see that you've proven that you can get stuff done. I think the third thing is sort of this like intangible feeling of inevitability of what you're creating happening. So we want to work with founders who are looking and see almost a different future than we see. And when you sit down with them and you hear them talk about it, you all of a sudden are transported in 5 years into the future. And all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, you're right, this is going to happen. And you're the team to make it happen. And we want to back that. So there's this sort of like this weird like future seeing inevitability aura that certain founders have that we try to look for. I mean, that has to also be grounded in reality of like, we actually have to get there and execute on it. That's why the execution side is powerful. So that's sort of like what we're looking for. But we're like, we can see that in people like pretty easily. And then the other things on there, just to quickly go through them. So team, market. So we want to see, are you in an interesting market? Is it a market or a space that we think if you win it, it could be big? Progress is the 5th one. So have you validated what you're doing? Do you have some data? Do you have some traction? That is actually less meaningful for us than you would think it is, because when companies go through the Techstars Accelerator experience, the pressures and the structure of the program tend to change the idea quite a bit push it into a better place. And so that traction or progress that you may have may not be for where the product ends up going. And so it just isn't as valuable. We still look at it, but it's not that important. And then the least important for us is the actual idea itself, because we know that changes pretty often.
All right. Let's take some audience questions now.
Yeah, let's do it. I always like the audience questions.
Who wants to be the brave soul that's first?
Yes.
Oh, you mentioned when you took a round of funding from Highway 12. How long ago was that?
First round was in 2010. Second round, I think, was in 2011.
Okay, so
Maybe-
you and your partner, when you put
No,
this idea,
2009, 2011.
okay, when you put your idea together, I'm sure you had a target, what you wanted to raise and what you were willing to give up to do so. Did it meet that expectation, or did you end up giving away more of the company when you took that round of funding? How did that work out for you?
There's actually a funny story in there. We never optimized for valuation or for protecting a certain amount of equity. We always optimized for getting the best people we possibly could involved in our company. So, frankly, I don't think that was ever part of the conversation. I think we just took the term sheet and ran with it. The one thing that we did do was we actually gave more equity to our investors, because at the last minute, I thought we weren't raising enough money, and I went to Mark and I said, could we do another 100K? And he was like, same terms? I'm like, yep, and we did it. And that extra 100K actually saved us. So it's actually something that I I advise companies to do, is to take an extra 100K. Like, that will buy you a little extra time. I know, like, you're laughing over there probably because we were in the fortunate position to be able to, like, take another 100K. But if you're in that fortunate position, you know, like, it's hard doing a startup and things just aren't going to always go your way. And for us, that bought an extra, like, a bunch of months because we were insanely frugal. Anyways, so we actually ended up giving our investors more than originally because we liked them and liked the terms.
So when you did finally sell the company, it was sold to AOL. How many suitors did you have prior to selling to AOL? And I guess I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, so our acquisition was really interesting. We had 3 companies pursuing the acquisition. It started with one company, but we were advised by our mentors, once we had one sort of interested acquirer, to shop the deal to see if we could find a better fit and maybe increase the price, and that worked out well for us. There eventually were 2 competing bids for the company, and we took the one that was a better return. So.
Who else? Yep.
So you talked about the belief that Techstars has that businesses can start anywhere, and certainly these days, nobody's surprised that you can start a business in Boulder. Although when you were doing it, it was probably something that was not as obvious. I'm interested in what kind of advice you can give us in Boise here about the types of things that we can do to make Boise a better place to start businesses.
Cool. I think first of all is like you need an ecosystem, right, around entrepreneurs to support them, to make introductions, to connect folks. So events like these I think are really important, and shout out to the Startup Grind folks for putting time and energy, and shout out to you guys for coming to events like this. I think these are really important. I think the big thing that Boulder did really well was we really embraced the give first mentality. And what that means is we were all out supporting each other, like, through and through in the Boulder ecosystem, helping each other, making introductions. Everyone from lawyers and the service side of startups to the investors who were in the area was like, giving first in the sense of like mentorship, introductions. Like, you guys are gonna win when you all win. And so instead of, and I'm not suggesting this is the case, but a huge difference I see almost everywhere outside of the Valley is it's a focus on collaboration in the ecosystem, where in the Valley it's a focus on competition. And I think that for all of these smaller markets, we have to be each other's best friends, and we have to support each other in the markets and across the markets. So I think this like give first mentality and just kind of like putting like the politics and the like BS around startups aside, and just like getting down to business and building some great companies and helping each other out and being supportive and acknowledging success, acknowledging failure, being okay with it, running events. Like, it's about just doing all of this stuff. And I think that what that'll do is it'll attract great entrepreneurs, it'll get the businesses going, you'll start to get some big wins in the community, keeping those wins in the community. I think all of those things are important things that we did in Boulder that worked well. I think an interesting thing that I think is a big challenge for all of us, including Boulder, outside of the Valley, is having pools of capital in the region. And the Valley is still definitely the epicenter of where the capital is, and I unfortunately I don't think that's going to change. But how can we create great angel communities? How can we get seed stage VCs to spin up in cities? Like Mark did an awesome thing starting Highway 12 Ventures here. Like, you know, that's a gutsy move, starting a venture capital firm in Boise, Idaho, right? Especially, when did you start Highway 12? 2000? Like, that's an awesome, like, gutsy thing. Like, we need more people doing that. That's what Foundry Group did in Boulder. Like, they said, look, we're gonna compete for deals all around the country, but we're gonna be based where we want to be based. So we need more of that. And it's happening. Like, there are a lot of like smaller seed stage funds popping up here and there. One of the managing directors of Techstars just left. He was the managing director in Kansas City, spun up a $7 million fund in Kansas City, funding companies in the Midwest. Like, that is awesome. We need more of that. I don't know how to like make more of that happen beyond, we do a bunch of work at Techstars educating angel investors around what it means to be a good angel investor and how to get plugged in, and that being an angel investor actually means writing checks. A lot of angel investors think being an angel investor means hanging out with other rich people, and like that's not really, that's your social club. Like, we're here to invest in companies, and so we try to run events that get people to actually like write checks and invest in companies. And actually David Cohen has been very instrumental in kind of like shifting the mentality from angel events being like these parties with small sandwiches, expensive small sandwiches and a lot of networking, to people actually like pitching and writing checks. So those are things that I think are also important. I don't know, unless any of the folks in here are angel investors and can spend time and energy building that ecosystem, I'm not sure how the entrepreneurs in the room can help that beyond building great companies and trying to source capital locally.
That's really good. Give first is one of our startup grind philosophies as well. And so I think that's something each of us can do personally. It starts with us. It's easy to say, you know, well, Boise, who's that? That's some nameless, mindless like community, but that's actually each person. And each of us can do that individually. That's something we can do.
I have an idea for your future startup grind talks.
Yes.
This seems subtle, but it'll make a difference. If you have, and I think you could do it with this group, maybe this is a little too big, sit in a circle. It's super powerful to sit in a circle versus like sitting this way, because it invites everyone in the room to participate instead of like, you know, all the attention maybe up on the stage. It doesn't work in like a huge group, but if you're like, how many people do we have here? Maybe 40, 50? Maybe if you're like 30 or less, try doing stuff in a circle. It's surprising how big of a difference it makes. Anyways,
cool.
Do it in your companies too.
Thank you. I had a question.
Thank you. I'm a founder of a company, non-technical. It's a B2B service company. We're successful. We'll do a few million in revenue this year.
That's awesome.
And thank you. And I want to transform what we do into a software platform. And so as I'm thinking about the best way to do this, I'm frankly struggling with, do we go out and build this from scratch? Or do we use various applications out there that people who have done really good, you know, software for this and for that? And, you know, trying to look at like Salesforce, and they have all these other applications so that you can easily deploy an app now and everything else. Is it better to do it all from scratch, or should we be looking to leverage, I guess, software as a service, but with a presentation layer on top of it?
I don't think I can advise you on black or white on that, but I think what I would focus on is the value or the solution set, and make sure that you really understand what value you're delivering, and that end customer won't care. If you're really delivering that value, that end customer won't care how you got there, whether you built all the technology or you used bubblegum and toothpicks and stuff to like piece it together by partnering with these other companies. I think as long as you're creating a product that's valuable, that's most important. Now, in the pursuit of that, you may come across some piece of it that you feel like you can own and you can really optimize, or the existing options out there don't suffice, and that's where it would probably make sense to build something, and that's where your IP is. That's where a lot of the value of the company is. So I think what I would do is try to be really resource efficient by not having to build recreating the wheel a bunch of times, and figure out where you want to invent And then once you figure out where you want to invent, put your energy into that while you're still meeting the value or the solution for the end customer. Clear? Unclear? Good? Okay.
All right, this is going to have to be our last question. I believe you had a question right here.
Yeah, thanks for the time and sharing your experiences. My question is towards your Techstars startups which you guys have been helping. So have you guys helped any IoT based startups? And if so, my question is, what is that those startups are just hardware based, or do they have any service model? Because I myself setting up IoT based startup. We are done with the prototype, but now we are learning from the market that we need to have some subscription type of a service model to make better revenue. So is there any startup which Techstars helped, which only did hardware, or is the software subscription is mandatory thing?
We've done a ton of hardware we've done a lot of hardware companies. We even have an IoT dedicated Techstars program. Like when I was talking about the vertical ones, it's based in New York. It's in partnership with a consortium of great brands like GE, PwC, et cetera. So we love IoT. There's all sorts of avenues of IoT. There's just the data side of it, and then there's the hardware side of it. And we've done a lot of companies on both sides, so we're super familiar with it. I think the challenge with hardware is you can't sell hardware without hard. So it's pretty difficult to do a hardware company because you have to solve a lot of different challenges than you just do in a software company. But we're not afraid of that. We've done a ton of them. What was the rest of the question? Just that do we do them and. I think so an example of a IoT-ish company that we did 2 years ago in the Boulder program that has both, and I think it's really powerful, is it's a personal safety device that retails for $9.90 or $99, good margins on that. But what's really interesting is there's a $10 a month subscription where you're basically getting like if you press this button and you need help, in just the $99 version, it goes to your loved ones. But what if your loved ones are unavailable or asleep or whatever? It then goes to a service center powered by alarm.com, and that service is an additional $9.99 per month. And that's what's really interesting about that business is this reoccurring revenue stream outside of the physical IoT device itself. So I think that if you can come up with a business like that has good margins on the hardware itself and has a subscription model, that's very interesting. Or it's more interesting than just a pure play hardware company. That being said, one of our biggest successes is more on the pure play hardware company. So many of you probably know of Sphero, which is, they made the robotic ball that you could control with your smartphone. That they also made the BB-8. So I'm sure you guys played or have seen at least the BB-8 toy that you can drive around. Like they made that. And incredibly successful. The vast majority of that company's revenue is just from one-time hardware sales. But I'm sure they're looking for ways to have some reoccurring revenue component as well. So I think ideally you want to have both, if possible. What was that? What, sorry? Highway 12 was the first investor in that company as well?
Cool.
Okay,
All right, we'll make it quick here.
I'll try to be quick, but it's a long answer. We decided to sell when two things happened. We noticed our personal passion for the project had waned, and second, we knew that we were at a crossroads where we needed to raise more money to get to the level of growth that we hoped, but we felt like the market was slower to mature and adopt our product than we had hoped. So we had a disconnect between the funding needs of the company and the market development, and based on our sort of like passion waning. And third, we had these 3, which really bubbled down to 2 good offers for the company, and we looked at it and said, this is the perfect time for us to sell. So, you know, I feel like, you know, as entrepreneurs, the reality is at some point we lose some passion usually. This is not a guarantee, but many founders lose passion for the project that they're working on. And we had spent 4 years like with lots of ups and downs. And for us, it was time for us to move on to the next thing, and we could get a good outcome, and so we chose to. Mark? Yeah, and during that time, we did a little bit of fundraising work too to say like, well, maybe our assessment of the market and opportunity is wrong, and if we sit down with some investors, they think it's bigger and want to fund it. And what we found through that was tepid interest, and usually if you have tepid interest, that's not great. So, cool. All right, I promise you guys a standing ovation. Thank you so much for being here and listening. It's great to meet all of you. Keep doing what you're doing. Boise is awesome. So, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Let's give Natty a hand as well. Thank you, Natty.